welcome back to the Great Rehumanization. I had a placeholder episode up for this one we're about to do. This one is about ideology, okay? So I'm going to read the essay, like we've been doing, and maybe offer some commentary. This one's a very long essay, though. 20 pages, and it's going to take some time to work our way through. Good news is I already have something up for this, but you don't get to see my face. It's just the audio podcast with some images in the background. But anyway, the logic of an idea. That's the title for this, basically. Ideology. Just translated, the logic of an idea. Ideology. We call it the tyranny in the tunnel. Okay, where ideology becomes this self-contained, perfectly logical rationalization that explains everything that needs to be explained. So don't you feel it? This peculiar gravity? This sense that some ideas carry a heavier cargo than others? Right? What I mean by that is just simply like, we get attracted to an idea. It carries weight for us. We feel it. I certainly do. Most people, I believe, instinctively grasp this. We may spend our lives arguing about the precise boundary lines, debating where an idea ceases to be a useful tool for understanding and instead becomes a dangerous weapon, but the underlying intuition remains simple. Some ideas heal, some wound, some build bridges, others burn villages. The visceral understanding that ideas possess a transformative, often perilous power is the very engine of this exploration. My purpose here is not to construct a simplistic morality list, not a do's and don'ts of this is moral, this is not moral, this idea is good, this idea is bad. My purpose here is not to construct a simplistic morality list, nor to indulge in the ritualistic public shaming of those whose beliefs diverge from my own. Instead, I am driven to inspect, hopefully with a little forensic precision, the insidious mechanisms by which any idea, however plausible or even benevolent at its genesis, can calcify into a rigid, all-encompassing system that dictates behavior, shapes policy, and far too often leads to unimaginable violence. Atrocities. This, in its essence, is what I mean by ideology, as it is the insidious logic of an idea, a subtle, almost irresistible lure. So, this next section, the metamorphosis of thought from idea to sealed circuit. This is how any idea, can become this train of rationalizations. Each car of that train, another perfectly logical connection to the engine. You know, the idea itself that explains everything. It's just a big rationalization. Ideology is what transpires when an idea undergoes a profound metamorphosis, evolving into what I describe as a sealed circuit. It is a reasoning process that, once initiated by an initial premise or claim, systematically expels all the inconvenient, messy data and contradictory evidence that surrounds it. Like a meticulously constructed legal brief, it wraps itself in the dialect of reason, rendering itself seemingly unassailable, and at the same time diagrammable, teachable. Its apparent clarity, its elegant self-coherence is precisely its seduction. For those ensnared within its grasp, coherence feels indistinguishable from proof. Yet this very coherence, this airtight logic, is simultaneously a kind of intellectual tunnel. It offers immense depth directly ahead, but absolute terrifying blindness to everything in the periphery. The peripheral vision is gone. Nuance, the subtle shades of reality, become nothing more than cacophonous noise. Any exception, any data point that dares to challenge the system's flawless internal consistency is swiftly reclassified not as legitimate counterpoint, but as deliberate act of treason. As I articulated in my podcast, when we are committed to an ideology, all we can think of is the logic of that idea. We get stuck in the tunnel and all that peripheral vision disappears. We only see straight ahead, and we're bound to that ideology. This narrowing of vision is not an accidental byproduct. It is the deliberate, self-serving, self-preserving function of the ideological tunnel. That podcast I was talking about, that was one of the original episodes that I did of this 6 years ago. The critical move we must make, the intellectual leap required for genuine insight, is to understand that ideology is far more than a mere generic roster of propositions, like a party platform, for instance. It's more than listing what a liberal or conservative supposedly believes. That list, those various declarations, are merely the little connecting points of the rationalization. Ideology is, at its core, an operational logic and a cognitive regime. It begins with a seemingly straightforward premise that purports to explain some aspect of the world, and then inexorably it extends that premise into an all-purpose map of reality. Inexorably. Let me say that again. Inexorably. It begins, that's Latin, meaning there's no escaping this, basically. Inexorably. Anyway, so consider, for example, the seemingly yet devastatingly reductive premise, all poor people are lazy. From that single unexamined assertion, a complete worldview can be constructed. Everybody who is successful deserves all of their success, and they all did it on the level and worked hard to get there. This is one of these rationalizations. And everybody who's not successful is just a lazier, less capable person. So, all poor people are lazy. That's a reasoned out thought process. And anybody who thinks that obviously thinks that they've got some airtight logic going on there. It's just obvious. So it's not merely an opinion. It becomes a comprehensive framework for interpreting human endeavor, for shaping policy, for ultimately judging and resenting those who deviate from its pronouncements. What makes this process so disquieting is its banality. Until one observes with horror how swiftly any decent, even noble idea can become weaponized. A necessary and humane critique of systemic inequality can, in the grip of ideology, metastasize into a totalizing theory of politics, demanding, for example, the wholesale redistribution of all property by a central authority. Oh, we've seen that show before. Didn't work very well. A genuine, valid mistrust of unchecked corporate power can be mutated into a moral cosmology, right, where markets themselves are demonically defined. And any dissent from this condemnation must be ruthlessly crushed, right? It's always about crushing dissent. Similarly, a rational, understandable fear of foreign invasion can bloom into a purity myth that demands internal purges, sacrificing individual liberties for the sake of an abstract, xenophobic, national character. The insidious truth is that the soul of ideology is not always wicked at its inception. It becomes so when it utterly refuses to register the world's actual, irreducible complexity. As Isaiah Berlin, ever the champion of nuance, understood, the human condition is characterized by a crooked timber, from which no straight thing was ever made. Ideology, by contrast, seeks to plane that timber into unnaturally straight, unyielding planks. The unseen current. Why we remain blind to our own traps. See, we weaponize this ideology thing. We point at other people and say, yeah, you're just an ideologue. That's just your ideology. It's in our language. So we get into our own traps. We don't see ourselves doing the same thing that we can see other people doing. Why is it so hard to see when we're in a trap? I posed this question in the podcast. That was that original podcast. And it strikes at the very heart of ideology's enduring power. In part, it is precisely because everything within the ideological framework appears so utterly coherent, so flawlessly logical. Once you commit to it, the logic is airtight, leaving everyone else to seem unequivocally wrong. But the problem runs deeper than mere intellectual consistency. We swim in these cognitive architectures, the way fish swim in an ocean, utterly unaware of the medium that sustains us, oblivious to the water itself. When we do find occasion to call out ideology, that's what we're doing, usually calling it out in somebody else. It's almost always an external accusation. They are ideological. They are lost in their tunnel. We instinctively spare ourselves the labels. This tactical self-exemption is a crucial element of ideology's craft, okay? It is the art of self-authentication, where we declare, look what I believe. It's just really self-explanatory. It's just obvious. You should see it too. So we look at our own beliefs as just common sense. It's just because, well, obviously I'm smarter than you, or else you'd get it too. And this allows us to remain mired in our own ideological traps, convinced of our own unique clarity. What often drives this conviction is not pure reason, but a potent brew of emotions. Okay, righteousness, fear, disgust, all meticulously tucked into this file that we label logic. We fail to see its emotional or sentimental origins. Feeling motivates conviction, and conviction will put locks on that little filing cabinet where we tuck all of those feelings, giving us the feeling of proof and logic. We become so deeply tunneled into the operational logic of our ideology that from the inside, everything appears inevitable and obvious, making us wonder why others cannot grasp its simple truth. Any facts that contradict our worldview are not mere disagreements, they are exceptions and fabrications, corruptions, leading us to label others as treasonous or even evil for not getting in that tunnel with us. Our culture, it must be said, is remarkably expert at accusing others of ideology. So we hear it constantly. Woke ideology, market ideology, identity ideology, and so on and so on. This pervasive finger-pointing aspect serves two crucial intertwined purposes. First, it allows us to readily identify our enemies, right? Demarcating them as beyond the pale of reason or morality. So they're not just enemies, but they aren't even capable of morality or reason. It's so dehumanizing. Okay, point of our show. Second, and most perhaps more insidiously, it furnishes us with a tidy moral map, a clear-cut guide to who is treasonous and who is pure. This map is vital for us to indulge in our own righteous indignation. That's the part that feels good to us. Get angry, the anger that we love, that we feed on. To feel superior, to feel more human, to feel more evolved, even as we systematically dehumanize and strip dignity from others. The implicit message is clear. Oh, look, they don't believe what we believe? They're not on our team. It's because they're treasonous and they're evil and they're corrupted. This process creates an entire grammar of fear, transforming the label of ideology into this potent weapon, right? We deploy it to shut down any genuine debate. When confronted, the reflex is to declare that the other person is they're the ideologue, and while it's quite likely true, because we all are, it becomes a back and forth pattern of dismissal that consolidates our own convictions into unassailable doctrines, which we then laud as courageous and principled and truthful and obvious, among other things. And, it's just common sense. What I think is common sense. Should be, at least, but apparently not. This pernicious double standard is ideology's true quiet victory. Okay. This pernicious double standard is ideology's true quiet victory. So we justify our ideology even further. We try to lend it extra validation and authority that we know that it doesn't have if we really step outside the tunnel and are brave enough to interrogate it, okay? When ideas become natural law, the explosive stakes. So the stakes explode, reaching truly intense heights when an idea transcends mere belief and assumes the mantle of communal natural law. This is when we begin to pretend an ideology is historically inevitable, scientifically mandated, or any form of necessary truth. Historically, religion traditionally pointed to an authority beyond the earthly realm, to gods, to sacred texts, as the ultimate arbiter of truth and morality. Ideology, however, flattens this vertical horizon, asserting that we can find all the answers right here and implement them right now. Okay, it promises an imminent salvation, an earthly utopia, creating a fervent belief that history, human nature, and even science can lend authority and seals of inevitability to ideology's pronouncements. Phrases shift and evolve, but the underlying structure remains constant. People have always been like this. All you have to do is look at history. I mean, the way we make ideas look like our ideas are just common sense, acceptable on the surface, we see it in the phrasing that we use. It's just common sense. It's always been like this. It's a claim to certainty. Absolute self-assurance. It tolerates no dissent. It culminates into a faith of inflexibility, of secular absolutism. It's a secular absolutism imbued with religious devotion. As Eric Hofer observed in The True Believer, the ready-made answers of mass movement can make a man feel as though he had never ceased to be part of the whole. This combination of secular absolutism and religious fervor is a powerful combination, and one that has consistently fueled totalitarian movements throughout history. The ready-made answers of a mass movement can make a man feel as though he had never ceased to be part of the whole. This is not some abstract theoretical exercise, okay? History, especially the ledger of the 20th century, stands as a stark warning. Not far away, right there behind us. It just happened. I find it deeply disturbing when influential voices dismiss the study of history, arguing that knowing history is not that important. And I'm talking about dipshit influencers doing what I'm doing, but who have like way bigger audiences, much better actors, I guess. But there are those out there with incredible influence who think it's cool to be flippant about history. Hopefully they'll grow out of that, and hopefully soon. Anyway, to ignore the past, particularly the lessons bequeathed by our grandfathers and great-grandparents, is to court disaster, okay? The 20th century vividly demonstrates how ideas, once hardened, evolve into systems that measure and classify and then eliminate. Class enemies, racial categories, dissenters all become mere variables to be corrected, to be removed, to be eliminated. All of those problems are made worse now by technology that can do that for us. Consider the grim historical record: National Socialism, Nazism, seemingly wrapped mass murder in the language of destiny and racial purity; Stalinism, bureaucratized terror under the guise of historical necessity, systematically destroying millions to fulfill a predetermined ideological future; colonial ideologies rationalized the dispossession and exploitation of entire peoples by positing scientific natural hierarchies that deemed some inherently superior to others, and none of these monstrous regimes, as I underscored, began as cartoon monsters, okay? They germinated from seemingly plausible grievances, compelling narratives, and even at times some genuinely valid analysis. Marxism, the one we like to talk about, for instance, offered a potent and often valid critique of the plight and alienation of the worker. Yet, these initial analyses, once captured by ideology, accrued into an unyielding moral and institutional force. Becoming the raw material for state-sanctioned rationalizations. And you know what those are. When these rationalizations cease to be mere thought and become method and action, the path leads, inexorably, to lethal action, to terror. Ideology becomes an engine of atrocity, and this is the biggest lesson of ideology from the 20th century. Let's talk about one of my favorites, Hannah Arendt, and the seed of totalitarianism. As I began this discussion, so I must reiterate, every ideology, without exception, contains within it the inherent seed of totalitarianism. Every idea. This stark thesis, drawn directly from the profound insights of thinkers like Hannah Arendt and Jacques Ellul, and indeed sharpened by the lived experiences of people like my grandfather, my grandparents. My grandfather was a World War II veteran, and his contemporaries, who I knew as well. He was a professor, fellow professors, his friends, that I was fortunate to spend some time with. It's not an abstract pronouncement, okay? While not every ideological person will inevitably become a butcher, a mass murderer, or a bootlicker, The internal logic of every ideology extends a clear invitation. It offers a seductive framework that claims to comprehensively explain history, morality, and all societal relations. The inescapable question that sooner or later arises with such a system is, who's going to implement this truth? The seductive answer, the dangerous impulse to command institutions and enforce this singular truth, invariably turns to the initial moral clarity of the ideology into administrative machinery. So that clarity of the ideology becomes the machine, this administrative machinery, and always it is ambitious actors, flawed and sinful men, usually who aren't thinking about the better welfare of their neighbors, who seize these reins of power and the machinery of the state. It's usually almost always bad actors, man. Often these actors may not even be deeply committed to the ideology itself, but they recognize its immense mobilizing force. And we have witnessed charismatic autocrats deftly shift the ideological needle to suit their ends, appropriating aspects from across the political spectrum, a tactic expertly employed by the Nazis, who consolidated and appropriated the entire ideological spectrum. A guy who's really good at this right now, or really bad at it, we can't tell yet. J.D. Vance. He's a guy who's willing to move things around for that expedience. It's a performance. I'll say that much. So the Nazis, they consolidated and appropriated an entire political spectrum. So truth in such a system degrades quickly into a state of pure terror, lawlessness, becoming whatever the leader declares it to be, whatever is required to keep him in power, usually. As Hannah Arendt detailed in The Origins of Totalitarianism, terror is the realization of the law of movement. Its chief aim is to make it possible for the forces of nature or the force of history to race freely through mankind, unhindered by any spontaneous human action. In other words, what she's saying is, terror ultimately is taking away our ability to act. This observation perfectly encapsulates how ideology, when wedded to power, obliterates individual agency. Looking across the ideological spectrum of the 20th century, both left and right, one discerns a disturbing symmetry. I am not, let me be abundantly clear, making a moral equivalence that reduces particular crimes to identical culpability in identical contexts. Historical specifics, technological capabilities, and individual actors certainly differ. However, I am making a crucial structural observation. Both leftward and rightward monisms, ideologies that insist on a singular totalizing truth, can converge on the same destructive techniques. Purge dissent, concentrate power, obliterate pluralism. If you turn left to avoid the right, you're going to go in a circle. If you turn right to avoid the left, you're going to go in a circle. The violence of the 20th century tragically demonstrates mirror corridors of terror, as exemplified by Stalinism on the left and Nazism on the right. Democracies, by contrast, survive and thrive because they preserve contestation, negotiation, and legal pluralism. When compromise, the very essence of pragmatic politics, is recast as corruption, the brakes come off the entire system. Here, it is useful to recall the old saying, often attributed to Bismarck, that politics is the art of the possible. This adage fundamentally implies a continuous process of give and take, an acknowledgement that no single side will ever achieve absolute victory. True political possibility resides in compromise, in each side conceding a measure of ground. To remove this art of the possible is to invite lawlessness. And while it may seem counterintuitive to label a totalitarian state as lawless, given its rigid imposition of rules, it is precisely this. Law, in a genuine sense, resides on the books, in established courts and judiciary. Rooted in a transparent process, in other words. Lawlessness, conversely, emerges when all of the decisions and the power reside in a committee or in one man. And the only real anchor to the law is what keeps those committees or that one man in power. Ideology, I argue, insists that the impossible is inevitable. Ideology insists that the impossible is inevitable. Necessary, that it's also necessary, and it's the only possibility. It is a grand delusion that seals itself off from compromise, dismissing what is realistic and instead digs a tunnel so deeply downwards that it leads straight to the darkest depths of that delusion. The insistence that one group can define everything and achieve its way in all matters, that pathology, if allowed to dig too far, masks totalitarianism. It makes totalitarianism inevitable. Okay, let me say that sentence again. The insistence that one group can define everything and achieve its way in all matters, that pathology, if allowed to dig too far, makes totalitarianism inevitable, resulting in a state built on lawlessness and ruled by pure terror. My use of severe descriptives here is intentional. The stakes are really high. My language has to match it. Let's talk about this phrase that I've coined here for this. The seduction of ideonaturalization, when science becomes a weapon. Okay? Ideonaturalization. The dangers of ideological tunnel vision, of the refusal to acknowledge complexity, become startlingly clear to me. Okay? They became clear to me just yesterday, so I wrote this months ago. But I was scrolling through Facebook, my Facebook feed, when I encountered a post from an individual with whom I confess I largely align politically. So this is a guy I usually agree with about politics. In the final stage of the ballot, 9 times out of 10, I bet I'd vote the same as this guy. But yet his post that he made this day struck a discordant and even alarming note. All right. It was a study published. He had shared a study published in the Scientific American, that magazine. The study was purporting to show a correlation between brain structure, specifically the amygdala size, which is part of the limbic system, and conservative politics. Okay. It was concluding rather bluntly that conservative politics are based on fear. Because the underlying conceit, the unspoken implication that drove this man to share it was pretty unmistakable. He was basically saying, well, people are MAGA because their brains are inferior to ours, to mine. So I recognized this with a jolt, as I say. It's the echo of a truly dangerous ideological maneuver that I've come to call ideonaturalization or ideonaturalism. It's the ideological imperative to find a scientific basis for one's own biases. So, at heart, no different from eugenics, thereby naturalizing and proving the inferiority of those who hold opposing views. I felt compelled to push back, so drawing upon everything I articulate in this piece and in my podcast, my fervent opposition to totalitarianism, my apprehension concerning intellectual tunneling, I recalled a similar incident. Okay, so I'm now commenting on this Facebook post, and I recall a similar incident. But this is at a friend. I go to my friend's house, and on his coffee table is the book The Liberal Mind. And it's written by a doctor, scientifically detailing how liberals are mentally ill and ruining society, basically. My friend was an older psychologist, and he eagerly embraced this pseudo-scientific dogma because, venturing into claims that liberals are specifically inclined to narcissism, scientifically proven to be narcissists, that bolstered my psychologist friend, who eventually became a Trump supporter. This back when I saw this book on his table, Bush was president, George W. Bush. But he was, a right-wing type guy, and having a book about how liberals were scientifically proven to be narcissists, greatly enhanced his argument in his mind. Same thing this guy's doing from the other side with the Scientific American article. So anyway, in my comment on the Facebook post, I highlight the symmetry there. No, you see, the right does the same thing too, and here's why it's dangerous. And so almost immediately, though, there was a response to my pushback from somebody who says, respectfully, I would like to know how many peer-reviewed studies you've read about on this issue. I think you're telling us exactly who you are by what you're saying here. Wow, so immediately. So this remark and its glib dismissal and immediate leap to character assassination perfectly illustrated the very dangers of ideology I'm trying to expose, and was exposing right there in that thread. From my critique of relying on pseudoscience to justify political leanings, this person somehow deduced my whole core identity and implied that I was revealing more about myself than I would like to. Just by that comment. Me saying, well, we better not use pseudoscientific to justify our beliefs. It's a dangerous path. And then some lady reads that comment and has already decided everything that is wrong with me and everything I'm trying to hide and who I am to the core. And you see the problem? So it's a classic ideological maneuver, just all, from many different angles, just in one Facebook post, filled with ideological distortion. From the comments, to the conceit of the post, to the article itself, all of it. It was a classic ideological move. So rather than engaging with the substance of what I was saying there, this lady just reduces it to my personal failing, a symptom of my supposed identity. You see? This reflex, this immediate dismissal based on perceived identity rather than content is precisely why I believe ideo-naturalization is so incredibly perilous. It is the very path trodden by the Nazis with their race science and eugenics, asserting that these people are inferior because here's my scientific proof. It posits that one's deeply held political beliefs are not the product of experience, circumstance, or cultural indoctrination, but are hardwired into one's very brain structure. Yet this entire premise crumbles under scrutiny, doesn't it? First, the simplistic left-right dichotomy. While it's very convenient for propaganda, it fails to capture the immense complexity of political leanings. And as I pointed out, there are people who are fiscally conservative, who don't like taxes, yet they are socially liberal. And they don't have any problem with gay marriage, and so on and so forth. How does a brain structure theory account for any such nuance? It doesn't. We often have contradictory positions. We're human beings. We're allowed to be contradictory. Should be expected. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe we just are having a hard time accepting ourselves. Okay, second, the environmental and cultural influences are demonstrably far more powerful than any scientific study shows up to this point. If I ask you your zip code, brother, sister, I can pretty much tell you who you voted for. I asserted this in the comments here on this Facebook post. That doesn't speak to your brain structure, okay? That speaks to your indoctrination, to your cultural influences. Furthermore, the definitions of left and right vary widely across different cultures and nations. Who is considered left in one country might be right in another, and making a universal brain structure correlation absurd. Consider the multitude of people who voted for Donald Trump after previously supporting Bill Clinton and Barack Obama. Where is their ideological consistency rooted in brain structure? Explain that with brain structure. You can't. It's all about opportunities. It's all about circumstances, what your family taught you, what your family didn't teach you, who you were around. These factors, I maintain, are far more likely to influence the brain structure than the brain structure informs the politics. And this is precisely why I'm so passionately critical of such pseudoscience. To declare, here's my scientific proof that you think the way you do because your brain is inferior to mine, is not only fallacious, but insanely dangerous. Right? It forecloses the possibility of changing any minds, of fostering empathy, of repairing our cultural ailments. The notion that political views are genetically or neurologically immutable, that denies our fundamental human capacity for growth and transformation. It denies the idea of neuroplasticity, which we'll get to. But indeed, history itself refutes this biological determinism. Practically all of Germany became enchanted by the spell under the Nazis, a country that gave us Goethe and Bach, profound art and philosophy. It defies all reason to suggest that this was due to some uniform structural amygdala-sized issues. It's rather a massive societal indoctrination, a terrifying example of how collective narratives can reshape consciousness, how the narrative can reshape the brain. Modern neuroscience, in fact, offers a profound rebuttal. neuroplasticity. Our brains are not static, predetermined structures. They are dynamic, constantly reshaped by experience, learning, and exposure to new ideas. As I cited, a study looked at MRI scans and brain structures, concluding that the participants' political views, this is one study I looked at, they shaped neurological responses at a very basic level, okay? Crucially, it did not state that the brain structure shape dictated political views. Instead, our political views, the ones that we are indoctrinated into and given and exposed to, actively shape our neurological circuitry. This means that when we encounter political imagery, our brains respond differently based on our lifetime exposure to varying ideas. The attempt to provide scientific proof for the inherent inferiority of opposing minds perfectly embodies the worst impulses in tunneling and ideological ossification that I've been describing this whole piece so far, and will continue to describe. It is a frightening echo of the historical abuses of science in the service of hatred and control. Let's look at the dynamics of self-binding, why we don't see our own cages. Returning to the question of why we don't see our own ideological moves, why we don't recognize the cages we inhabit, the mechanisms are deeply entrenched, both psychologically and socially. When compromise itself is recast as corruption and treason, the foundational restraints that safeguard a pluralistic society begin to unravel. Polite policy differences devolve into rival blueprints for what actually counts as human life, leading to the dehumanization of those who disagree, whose lives become less valuable than ours. When one side then moves to criminalize any alternatives, the institutions designed to mediate pluralism, the courts, a free press, civil society, they're not merely weakened, they're obliterated. They're destroyed completely. The path from grassroots zealotry to state imposition is a two-way street. There is a bottom-up enforcement where ideological fervor from the populace demands conformity, and a top-down imposition where the state dictates its narrative. Both lead to the same endpoint. Systems where dissent is not only illegitimate, but equated with existential error. In such a state, where law becomes a mere instrument for the survival and the protection of the ruling committee or the tyrant, any form of dissent is interpreted as an existential threat, warranting elimination. This inevitably leads to a system of state terror. I often encounter, especially among young men online, a baffling ignorance of what a bootlicker state truly entails. Now, they fetishize the architecture of the bootlicker state and brag about it without understanding the horrific reality. I'm not a bootlicker! I'm the one wearing the boot! That bullshit. That puerile bullshit. Okay, so the truth is, when a society reaches the totalitarian threshold, when everyone is metaphorically under the boot, it transforms every loved one into a potential enemy. Children are forced to betray parents. Families are torn asunder by impossible choices, and terror becomes the default mode of social interaction. There is nothing cool about such a society. The moment a society accepts that some people are going to be under the boot, everybody will be under the boot. So, why do we, including these very young men on, their video channels, fail to grasp this reality? Why do they believe they will be the ones wearing the boot rather than becoming its victim? And the reasons are multifaceted. Let's look at some of these. Cognitive ease. All right, cognitive biases, particularly the available heuristic, helps explain this. Stories and narratives that fit our existing worldview, that provide convenient explanations and a comforting sense of conviction, are cheap to keep. It requires far less mental effort to maintain a coherent, albeit flawed, ideological framework than to consistently interrogate its premises. Number 2, identity. We invariably attach our very identities to these ideologies. They become our badges, our shields, our weapons. To abandon them, to admit intellectual error, feels like an agonizing betrayal of self, of tribe, of one's moral lineage. As Carol Tavris and Elliot Aronson brilliantly illustrate in Mistakes Were Made, but not by me, the human need for self-justification is immense. and our identities become deeply intertwined with our beliefs, making it excruciatingly difficult to confront inconvenient truths. Number 3, social reinforcement. The groups and communities we inhabit, which often coalesce around shared ideological frameworks, relentlessly reward orthodoxy and punish deviation. Once you commit to being an ideological warrior, you are expected to follow the script from top to bottom. Any deviation invites ostracism and accusations of betrayal, a phenomenon clearly visible in the constant, stupid, dramatic feuds among the online intellectual dark web influencers. Wait until there's a real power at stake here. And this is how we get to the purges and the betrayals of Stalin's inner circle. Rhetorical cost. There is a substantial rhetorical cost associated with publicly interrogating one's previously stated ideological stances. Few are willing to risk being perceived as inconsistent, as having no intellectual honesty whatsoever. This fear of public recantation. I'm getting too tired to read. Recantation. Okay. Especially after years of flexing their ideological stances, traps individuals in their own narratives. It is, as I vividly put it, terrifying to tell your own children that everything you've been saying for a really long time is wrong. Hey, I gave you the wrong framework, son. I've been full of shit for the last 30 years. Oh, I forget. Camera's over here. Boy, am I getting tired. I've just been too afraid to admit it. This psychological barrier is almost insurmountable for many. Let me go over this again, okay? There's a rhetorical cost to admitting that you've been wrong, because once one's gone out in the world and claimed all these ideological stances, few are willing to risk being perceived as inconsistent and having no intellectual honesty. So the fear of public recanting, especially after years of ranting and inflexing their ideological stances. Sorry, I have a typo here. It says inflexing. That's not meant to be there. We need to go ideology somewhere around the 40 mark. Gosh, I hate having to edit this stuff, okay? The rhetorical cost. There's a substantial rhetorical cost associated with publicly interrogating one's previously stated ideological stances. Few are willing to risk being perceived as inconsistent, as having no intellectual honesty whatsoever. This fear of public recantation, publicly recanting, taking back what you said, especially after years of ranting, of years of flexing ideological stances, that traps individuals in their own narratives. It is, as I vividly put it, terrifying to tell your own children that everything you've been saying for a really long time is wrong. Hey, I gave you the wrong framework, son. I've been full of shit for the last 30 years, and I've just been too afraid to admit it. The psychological barrier is almost insurmountable for most people. The self-blinding is further exacerbated by the asymmetrical weaponization of propaganda. Disagreeable information is swiftly labeled propaganda. Agreeable material is elevated to fact. This rhetorical sleight of hand shields our ideas from scrutiny. The reflex is to attack the source, not the content, dismissing any challenge by tainting the messenger. While comforting, this approach is intellectually bankrupting. It consolidates us into curated information silos, where reality is a fortified narrative, replete with enemies to hate and saints to claim. George Orwell's prescient analysis in 1984 and Animal Farm show us how language is corrupted and truth is twisted to maintain ideological control, where newspeak dictates thought. The double-edged sword. Ideology is both conservative and revolutionary. The irony, often missed in our polarized discourse, is that ideology can be both deeply conservative and fiercely revolutionary at once. It conserves itself through rigorous exclusion of dissenting voices, the canonization of its core doctrines, building impenetrable intellectual fortresses. Yet it can also be profoundly revolutionary, driven by an ambition to completely reorder society, to tear down existing structures and rebuild them according to a singular blueprint. Some ideologies, like Nazism, wear tradition as an armor, appealing to ancient roots, blood, and soil. Others, like Bolshevism, present themselves as harbingers of radical renewal, carrying history forwards towards a perfected future. But both of them, critically centralize authority, and both degrade when the end is perceived to justify the means. Small compromises, perhaps slight erosions of constitutional principles, incremental locks and bolts on the Constitution, or a gradual defining deviancy down become first tactical, then necessary, and then normalized. Slowly, subtly, what once seemed extreme or intolerable begins to appear normal, even inevitable, as the ideological horizon imperceptibly shifts. This journey from rationalization to method and action is gradual, insidious. It's a process. So let's look at how we construct defenses against this ideological problem that we have. Intellectual hygiene, pluralism, human scale, humanity. Let's talk about it in a minute. So what are we to do in the face of such formidable shape-shifting adversity? Such a formidable shape-shifting adversary? This is not a call for timid relativism or false equivalencies. Some ideas are demonstrably, unequivocally harmful. All right, genocide, slavery, systemic oppression. These can be proven wrong by empirical evidence and rigorous moral argument. Not all ideas are equal, nor should they be treated as such. However, the diagnostic claim that all ideas carry the seed of totalitarian risk tells us that we must actively construct robust cognitive and institutional defenses. This, I believe, is the essence of the great rehumanization I champion, a cultural movement designed to cultivate intellectual honesty and accountability and to make intellectual work cool. Make it cool, man. Here are the essential defenses. Here's what we can do. We can cultivate intellectual hygiene. And it might sound pedestrian, even boring, but it's practical. We have to actively audit our premises. We have to challenge the deeply ingrained assumptions that we have, the ones that we rarely question. We have to solicit counter evidence, not to score rhetorical points, but to genuinely discern whether our intellectual systems leak. This means we have to hang out with people who are smarter than us. A lot of us don't want to do that. This is not about sophistry or winning arguments, okay? It's about identifying and plugging the intellectual leaks, those holes in our understanding. We must dare to ask forbidden questions, playing devil's advocate with earnestness, even when it's uncomfortable. Intellectual humility, boundless curiosity, healthy skepticism, and a profound willingness to be surprised, even to let go of our long-claimed identities. These are anti-ideological practices. They are harder now than ever before, but they're more necessary. As Aristotle wisely remarked, it is the mark of an educated mind to be able to entertain a thought without accepting it, a sentiment that perfectly encapsulates the necessary detachment from immediate conviction. 2. We need to protect institutional pluralism. Our defense against ideological capture must also be architectural and structural. We must safeguard and nurture spaces that encourage pluralism. We're going to have to create some. We must safeguard and nurture spaces that encourage pluralism, and that means genuine freedom of speech, independent media that challenges all narratives, a decentralized civil society. This means actively engaging in churches once again, our neighborhoods, our schools, getting to know our neighbors, acting locally, thinking globally. Decentralization, a principle surprisingly agreed upon across some left and right factions, it's paramount, okay? Legal checks and robust accountability mechanisms are the brick and mortar of a pluralist society. This is not about sentimental niceties, guys. When multiple institutions can legitimately name and discuss what truth is, when power is deliberately dispersed, it becomes exponentially harder for totalizing claims to harden and conquer. Our democratic republic is far more than just simple vote tallying. It's a structural arrangement of mutual restraints, of cultural agreements, a certain level of cooperation, the very art of the possible. The erosion of these restraints is the direct path to ideological dominance, as Alex de Tocqueville warned in Democracy in America. The tyranny of the majority, or the creeping soft despotism, can be as suffocating as any overt totalitarian regime if pluralism is not vigilantly guarded. Number 3, human scale moral reasoning. Ideology seduces us by transforming complex moral choices into simplistic math problems. It instructs us to subtract all uncertainty and add solving power to our little convictions. This rationalization, this mathematical approach to morality, functions disturbingly well until we are confronted with the ultimate equation. Who lives and who dies? We must, therefore, insist on the human context. We cannot turn our opponents into faceless ciphers or symbols. We must resist scapegoating, even when the urge is overwhelming. As I admit, it is for me, especially with certain technological elites. We must make our opponents people with faces and histories. Humanization in this context is not sentimental. It is a practical resistance to the reductionism that renders atrocities thinkable. It is the refusal to shut ourselves off from the true inner light, from the inherent humanity that prevents us from rationalizing mass murder. True talk. 4, demystify inevitability. We should fiercely resist and demystify the rhetoric of inevitability. When politicians or leaders speak as if their actions are simply history itself, or that science mandates it, these are immediate red flags, sirens blaring a clear warning. Probability can never be destiny. Tendencies are not immutable laws of nature or science. Our collective responsibility is to demand margins of uncertainty, to leave ample space for doubt, for alternative pathways, a healthy dose of epistemic humility. It serves to puncture the rhetorical balloon that paints any dissent as irrational. There must and always be room for rational dissent. As Albert Camus argued in The Rebel, the pursuit of absolute justice or a perfectly ordered world often leads to a new form of tyranny. True rebellion recognizes limits and the inherent ambiguity of existence. I'm still recording, but you can come up. I'm still recording, but you can come up. Okay, I had to get up. A crucial caution must be applied to the current cultural obsession with labels, okay? Debates obsessing over whether the Nazis were left or right, for example. For instance, okay, I'm going to talk about this in a couple places because it just grinds my gears. All right. For instance, certain discussions are ultimately less useful than identifying the underlying mechanics of totalizing narratives. It's a taxonomic nitpicking. It often functions. Okay. I gotta get a drink. All right. The trap of labels and the necessity of patterns. A crucial caution must be applied to the current cultural obsession with labels. Debates obsessing over whether the Nazis were left or right, for instance, are ultimately less useful than identifying the underlying mechanics of totalizing narratives. This taxonomic nitpicking often functions as mere trivial provocation. To hear someone like Jordan Peterson claim that, "I don't know if anybody's really ever done the research as to whether the Nazis were really left or right." I think he says calculations, actually. Done the calculations. That shit drives me crazy. The truth is, the historical documentation of the Nazis was virtually instantaneous and unparalleled, Mr. Peterson. Instead of scrambling labels, we have to ask more incisive questions, more important questions, more honest questions. Which movements centralize state power? And how do they achieve it? Which movements dehumanize groups using narratives of destiny or nature? And what were their methods? Which movements abolish plural legal orders in favor of party or leader rule? And how do they go about it? These are the enduring features that truly matter, Dr. Peterson. To be clear, the historical fact remains: Nazism's racialist, hierarchical, ultra-nationalist character does not erase the structural truth that extreme left projects, like Stalin's and Mao's, deployed similar apparatuses of control and terror. As I summarize, the fact that the Nazis were extremely right-leaning doesn't change the fact that Stalin and Mao used basically the exact same processes of control and terror. Obsessively scrambling labels only misses the diagnostic, the dynamics of absolutism. The reflexive denial of inconvenient historical placements for the sake of identity is its own ideological symptom, and I'm taking your temperature, Dr. Peterson. Every ideology carries the seed of totalitarian extension, particularly when it acquires institutional force. Every ideology carries this seed of totalitarian extension, particularly when it acquires institutional force. When an ideology becomes embedded in curricula, codified in law, dictates permitted vocabulary, and enforces silencing mechanisms, the very institutions designed to serve society begin to convert arguments into practice. These practices, in turn, normalize what was once considered intolerable, absurd, or horrific. Bureaucrats, educators, neighbors, ordinary people slowly begin to rationalize the unthinkable because the entire horizon shifts. So, let's talk about the local and the patient approach to this, the cultivating of a countercultural ethic. Okay, the remedy must be both local and patient. It is the cumulative effect of good parenting, thoughtful schooling, responsible editorial choices, ethical corporate governance, and principled union practices. Stuff like that, guys. It demands intellectuals brave enough to embrace unpopularity and ordinary citizens willing to cultivate the difficult art of tolerating ambiguity. Staying with uncertainty is countercultural in an age obsessed with instant clarity. Yet it's profoundly necessary. It is a moral choice. This is what I mean by slow politics: stubborn, iterative, accepting compromise as an inherent human activity, not as a betrayal. Some might fear that this approach saps activism, that it encourages complacency, but not at all. I urge you to fight. Fight. Go ahead. Fight for what you believe in. But do so with humility and understand the importance of the pluralistic tactics I've described. Be evidence-based, respect the rights of others, be institutionally aware, and be iterative, willing to change your approach as circumstances demand. The fundamental error is purification. The imagination of politics as a cleansing force that inevitably devolves into a witch hunt. True reform envisions institutions capable of correction without annihilating dissent. Pluralism, therefore, is not merely a preference, it is a vital, enduring principle. A softer, perhaps less austere note, ideology is not pure darkness. It is, in a profound sense, the story by the fire. People inherently inherently need narratives. We need narratives to orient ourselves, to find meaning and coherence in a chaotic world. The crucial obligation, however, is to choose stories that remain open to amendment, not those that promise final absolute salvation, especially for those like myself who embrace traditional religious faith. The constant challenge is keeping that belief from turning into a worldly ideology. A useful ethic is one that is teachable to children and durable under adult scrutiny. This is, in its essence, a deeply conservative notion. If an idea guides a child towards empathy and cooperation, don't hit each other, try to share, and can withstand the rigorous interrogation of an adult mind, it possesses genuine wisdom. This tendency to be intrigued by ideologies is not inherently a horrible darkness. It is a human trait that demands some wisdom, okay? It requires acknowledging our own inevitable ignorance and susceptibility to propaganda. If a framework cannot survive honest interrogation, it is not wisdom at all. It is merely a test of loyalty. It's dogma. It's an idea. It's a religion disguised as an idea. Okay, so here's the practical checklist for avoiding an ideological trance. And this is basically where we end things here. This has been a long one, okay? To actively resist the seductive pull of ideological trance, I offer a pragmatic checklist, okay? Name your premises. Name your premises. Make explicit the foundational assumptions and biases you rarely challenge. So look at what you believe. Go ahead and write them down, even as if they were like in a foreign text, like you don't even recognize them. Seek structural critics. We already went through these above. So actively invite and engage with people who fundamentally disagree with you, especially those you respect. Hopefully we can still respect some people we disagree with, right? Basically stress test your thinking. Don't try to score rhetorical points, just try to identify the leaks in the system. All right? If you know somebody who reads a lot and thinks a lot and you disagree with them, listen to them more. If you know anybody in your life and you can at least admit, okay, they read and think about this a lot, but I don't really listen to them. They read and think more than I do, and I don't listen to them. That's the person you're going to go to. Stress test your shit. Seriously. Go be friends with people who are smarter than you. Now. It's really important. All right. Guard institutions of contestation, okay? So we need plurality everywhere. Defend the institutions that foster pluralism, free and independent press, autonomous agencies, robust civil liberties. All right, resist purity tests within your own political frameworks, okay? Your own teams, your own parties. Refuse to engage in purity tests. Build broad coalitions, tolerate genuine differences, recognize that a shared goal can be pursued through a whole varied means of approaches. Match moral claims to evidence. Scrutinize your own moral claims. Ensure they're proportional to evidence. Okay, this is just really a matter of being honest with ourselves. Humanize relentlessly. That's the point of the whole show, the whole program. Consistently treat your opponents as full human beings with histories, needs, and dignity. See their faces. They're not just ciphers on our ideological maps. This is a practical armor against the dehumanization that precedes atrocity. Okay? These are not magic cures. These are practical disciplines. These are practices that make the ossification of thought harder. Make the hardening of our thoughts harder. They refuse the pervasive seduction of zero-sum truth, the notion that one side must win absolutely and that the other must be utterly vanquished. If you followed this argument this far, you might wonder if I'm advocating for complacency or cowardice in the face of truly monstrous ideas. No, absolutely not. I am rather asking for a different, perhaps deeper courage, and that would be the courage to be wrong, to tolerate otherness, to repair institutions rather than burn them down. This courage manifests as a stubborn art of iterative politics, okay? One that accepts compromise as an inherently human, often righteous act rather than a betrayal. We often fling the word ideology like a sneer or a sharpshooter's label. Sometimes that's apt, that's important, that needs to be done. But to reduce every disagreement to mere ideology is to miss some intricate context too. The texture of human thought. Some arguments are purely analytic, some are primarily rhetorical, and others are deeply emotional. Still others are fundamentally structural. The ultimate goal is not to hurl the label as an insult, but it's to cultivate the acute ability to recognize when an argument or any argument has transformed into that closed system, when something becomes an ideological tunnel. A closed system, rigid, utterly intolerant of nuance. That recognition, that moment of clear-eyed discernment is the crucial first step towards constructing anything genuinely better. Ideas make worlds, okay? Ideas make worlds. Ideologies claim worlds. Ideas make the world. Ideologies hold the world into place. Ideologies pour concrete over the living, turn it into stone. Respecting the profound power of ideas means consistently refusing to allow any single inflexible logic to become the unyielding skeleton for all human life. Okay, in this era of instantaneous communication and rapidly shifting institutional landscapes, the disciplined practice of pluralism and the cultivated habit of humility are not romantic relics of a bygone age. They are our most practical, indispensable armor. We must teach them, practice them, and live them publicly. They are the essential instruments that prevent politics from becoming a predetermined cosmic destiny. And a final accounting. Diagnosing ideological danger does not absolve evil actors of responsibility. Tyrants, ultimately, make conscious choices. Nor does it mean we cannot commit fiercely to causes we believe in. What it does mean is that we must construct our commitments upon practices that actively admit correction, courageously tolerate dissent, and insist upon humanization. We must learn to hold our ideas with open hands, to organize our institutions widely, to cultivate the profound habit of being wrong, and never, ever to confuse the raw, compelling force of feeling with the unyielding force of proof. The minute we conflate these, our idea ceases to be a tool that helps us build worlds. Instead, it becomes a cage, and cages, however elaborately gilded by theory, however self-authenticating their logic, they still are unequivocally cages. Okay, this is the great rehumanization. And we're called to be the light of the world, to be the salt of the earth. Sheep amongst wolves. This demands a shrewdness, the wisdom of the serpent, a tough-mindedness, and a discernment. Yet it also demands the harmlessness of doves, open-heartedness, compassion, driven by a profound love for our neighbors. We are told, do not conform to the patterns of this age. Be transformed by the renewal of your mind. This is the path forward, the arduous, essential work of rehumanization. Peace and love. Talk to you next time. I blur distinctions of us and them. I don't know where